and we will be posting both the PowerPoint slides and a recording of the webinar on our California Fostering Connections website, and the address is listed there as well. We are going to have some time at the end of the web seminar for Q&A, but you can actually send your questions at any point during the webinar. We will hold them all until the end, but you can send them at any point along the way as they come up. And you can see there on your control panel, there's a place for you to type in questions, so you can just go ahead and send your questions through there. And then at the end, I'll be moderating the questions that come in. Next slide, please. So today's web seminar is part of a 3-part series that we are doing on the CalYouth study. The first webinar was on the topic of housing, and that was last month, and a recording of that is available on the California Fostering Connections website. So there was lots of really great information shared on that webinar. If you didn't get a chance and you're interested, you can go to our website and listen to that. Today, obviously, is on the topic of education. And the final web seminar in this series will be on November 17th, and it will be on health. And if you're registered for today's webinar, which all of you are because you're here, you are actually automatically registered for the one on November 17th. You don't need to do anything further for that. You will get a reminder email the day before that will provide you with the instructions for logging on. Next slide. So I am so excited to be able to introduce our presenters this morning. We have myself, Debbie Rauscher with the John Burton Foundation, moderating today's web seminar. Lori Cappy has joined us from IE Communications, who's going to be sharing a little bit at the beginning. And then Mark Courtney with the University of Chicago Chapin Hall. We're very excited to have him presenting his research information on today's web seminar. And you can go to the next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, or to Lori. Sorry.
To Lori. Yeah, okay.
Hello, everybody. Is the audio quality okay?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
thank you. Great. Okay, terrific. So I just want to give you a quick background. The CalYouth study is, as some of you probably know who might have been on the previous webinar, is funded by the following. I'm not going to read them, but it's the organizations noted on the right. Many of them are part of what's called the California Child Welfare Co-Investment Partnership. So as you can see, there include both public and private funders. And the purpose of the study is to, purpose of this support is to financially support the Chapin Hall research that Mark's going to be presenting. The stakeholders noted here also provide guidance and feedback. We also host the CalYouth study section with results on the website where you can go and get more detail. And as we're doing today, we are promoting these results, so we don't want the research to sit on a shelf or in a binder. And through these presentations and other kinds of outreach, hope to translate these results into the appropriate policy and practice reforms. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello? Thank you.
Just advance it 2 slides. Okay.
Oh, okay. So basically, the website shows, here's the website, and what you can go to this website, what you'll see is it's something that you can print, download and print if you want to share. It's a 4-pager. There's also the full results. There's some video from a conference that was done back in May. Could you go to the slide right before this, actually, Mark, or who's ever advancing? So I just wanted to note that this is a good resource for you for video and also printable PDFs, etc., if you want to share this with your colleagues. And then the next slide is the CalYouth in the Loop. And so I'm just going to give a brief plug for this because I think it's very important that beyond the 700 or so young people that were interviewed, we're also engaged in a project to get the perspectives of youth, nothing about us without us. And so we would like to see we've come up with different mechanisms for getting feedback on the results of this study. So that's what's listed here. It's called CalYouth in the Loop. There's a website, and if you want to help with that, there's contact information on the bottom. And then if you could just advance me quickly to the next slide, I will complete my 3-minute plug. So the next slide is if you go to this website, CalYouth in the Loop, what you'll see is ways that you can direct young people to speak up on the issues that matter. There's 2 portals, one if they're still in extended foster care, one if they're not, and the idea of this is to get their feedback. And then if you can press to the next slide, we're kind of working on a methodology to get the young people to provide this feedback loop, and that's through recruiting folks who, young people who will be youth prospective recruiters. So those of you who are on the phone, and it looks like we've got 80 people, if you're in touch with young people 18 to 21 age, 18 to 24 age, and you think that they might want to take on this role, please let us know. We've come up with a way to compensate them. We also think that this is going to be valuable experience for them going forward. So please put young people in touch with us and for this CalYouth in the Loop position. Okay, and that's all for me. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lori. So this is Mark Courtney. I'm going to be summarizing a brief description of the CalYouth study, and then sharing findings from the CalYouth study specifically around their educational trajectories from around age 17 to age 19. So CalYouth is an evaluation of the impact of California Fostering Connections to Success Act on outcomes for foster youth. And what we are doing with this study in terms of data collection is we're young people in California foster care making the transition to adulthood. And we're doing that using a variety of sources of information. We're doing periodic surveys of young people themselves, and I'll share with you some data from that today. We're also doing surveys of caseworkers in California, county caseworkers who serve young people in California foster care, including the young people participating in our surveys. And we'll also be reporting on analysis of government program administrative data, but I'm not going to be sharing data from those 2 sources today. So the youth study. The purpose of the longitudinal youth study is to obtain information directly from young people making the transition to adulthood from foster care in California about a wide range of their experiences in care, their utilization of services, and then outcomes in all the domains a responsible parent would be concerned about: education, employment, health, the social support these young people have, whether they're engaged in problematic behaviors, whether they're forming their own families, etc. And thus far, we've collected surveys from these young people at 2 different points in time. So the Wave 1 survey, or the baseline survey as we call it, was done back in 2013 with young people who were on average about 17 years old. They were all in care at the time. They'd been in care for at least 6 months. And we have young people from 51 counties in the study. We oversampled young people in some of the smaller counties and undersampled Los Angeles a bit because there are plenty of young people there to talk to. We were able to interview 95% of the young people who fit our sample description. And then the results I'm going to be sharing today come from the follow-up survey, Wave 2, of our interviews with these young people when they were age 19. And those interviews took place last year, and we were able to follow up with about 84% of the young people we interviewed the first time around. So who are these young people? This is the demographic characteristics of the young people we interviewed at 19. You can see that they're predominantly female. That reflects the age distribution generally of young people aging out of care or reaching the age of adulthood in care in California. Almost all of them were 19 years old when we talked to them. We're a handful that had reached their 20th birthday. It's a very ethnically and racially diverse group reflecting the population of young people in care in California, and the overwhelming majority of them speak English at home. So the first takeaway from the study, this is consistent with what we know from administrative data in California, is that the vast majority of young people approaching the age of majority in care in California are choosing to remain in care, or if they leave, many of them come back. So if you look at the left side of the slide, you see the care status at age 19 of these young people. And you can see about 2/3 of them never left care since they were 17. Another 13% left care but were able to re-enter, which is a provision of California's law. That's not the case in every state that's extended care, but it is true in California. And about 1/4 of these young people have left care and never came back. And you can see that most of them exited care at 18 or 19, although some of them exited care before 18 among those who had left care. So while we're going to focus on education, I think it's useful to start with just an observation of how many of these young people were either working or employed, since being connected in that way to employment or work is something that we generally like to see among young adults. And you can see nearly 3/4 of young people we talked to were either enrolled in school or employed. About 1/5, a little less than 1/5, are employed only. And again, as I mentioned, about 3/4 were neither employed or enrolled in school. But we're going to focus on their education status in this webinar today. So about 71% of the young people at 19 had a high school diploma or GED. About a little over half of the young people overall were currently enrolled. And among those enrolled, 60% were in college. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and generally talk about the entire population, young people in care and out of care. And then I'm going to share findings on how the young people in care differ from those out of care with respect to their experiences in school. So overall, you can see that about half the young people at age 19 are enrolled in a 2-year college, and there's another smaller group that's enrolled in a 4-year college, about 13%, about 20% enrolled in high school, and then a smaller group are enrolled in GED, continuation courses, adult basic ed, etc. So that's among those who are enrolled in school, that group of about 54%. But when we look at differences between young people in care and those out of care, we see some pretty significant ones. You can see that young people who are in care are more likely to have a high school diploma or GED or the equivalent than those who have left care, and they're also more likely to have a vocational certificate, significantly more likely to have a vocational certificate. There's also big differences in terms of, not just in terms of what their educational attainment at 19, but there's big differences in terms of their educational enrollment at 19. So if you look at the left side, those are young people not in care at age 19. And you can see that 71% of the young people who have left care are not enrolled in school of any kind, and that less than half of those who are enrolled in college, basically. So you got a lot of them enrolled in GED programs, vocational schools. Well, I guess it's a little more than half college, but there's a huge difference in terms of the percentage of young people who are enrolled in school at all between those in care and those out of care. And if you look at the right side, among the young people who are in care, you can see that over 1/3 of them are enrolled in a 2- or 4-year college. So that's a huge difference. It's almost 3 times as many as the young people you see who are not in care at Wave 2 enrolled in a 2- or 4-year college, and then you've got some enrolled in high school and continuing ed and voc ed, etc. What about funding for education? Where are these young people getting the resources they're using to continue their education? So among youth currently enrolled in school, about 3/5 are using scholarship money, grants, stipends, student loans, voucher, or other type of aid to pay for educational expenses. Among youth with a high school credential, 29% have ever received an education training voucher. So I suspect that the vast majority of people online know this, but nationally we have something called the Chafee Education Training Voucher Program, which can provide up to $5,000 in support per year to young people who've aged out of care through age 23. So these young people generally eligible for the ETV, and among those are the high school credentials, so they could pursue some kind of post-secondary education. About 29% have ever received an education training voucher. But 37% of the young people reported not knowing what an ETV was. So, while there's some great news from the study, there's also some room for improvement, and that's certainly an area for improvement, at least making young people aware of something they're eligible for. There are big care status differences in funding for education that I want to note. So young people who are currently enrolled, young people who are in care at Wave 2 are about twice as likely as young people who are not in care to be using scholarships or other financial aid to pay for education. And then among youth with a high school credential, again, that group that's in principle eligible for an education training voucher if they're in continuing education, continuing their post-secondary education, young people in care were about twice as likely to be receiving an ETV as young people who are out of care. So, that suggests that there may be a relationship between being in care and getting these kinds of support, being aware of an ETV, accessing an ETV. I should note that other research that's been done suggests that remaining in care is generally associated with access to a wide variety of services, including educational supports. And then we've got a lot of data, and I should make a note. It was a slide shown earlier of our report. All of this information is available on the Chapin Hall website and the co-investment website that Lori mentioned earlier as well in our report from the youth survey. So among young people in college, what are they taking advantage of in terms of resources? What kind of support are they getting while they're in college? And these are things that we collected extensive information about. So the young people can choose more than one of these kinds of sources of funding, and you can see that a little over half of them are receiving an education training voucher. Over 70% are receiving some other kind of scholarship, fellowship, or grant. I should note that these young people are considered independent, financially independent if you age out of foster care by definition in terms of federal financial aid. So they would overwhelmingly be eligible for need-based grants like a Pell Grant, for example. About 1 in 10, a little less than 1 in 10, are relying on student loans. Nearly a third are relying on earnings from their own employment or from savings. Relatively small percent, I should say, certainly in comparison to young people generally going to college, relatively small percent are relying on money from a relative friend or other people, and about 1 in 10 from some other source. About half are involved in some kind of campus support program for foster youth, for example, Guardian Scholars programs at many colleges in California. And then a lot of the young people are taking advantage of supports on campus. So over a third are taking advantage of tutoring, about 1/5 taking advantage of programs that are generally there for young people who from disadvantaged backgrounds. Over half are taking advantage of academic advising. And again, over half are meeting with their professors outside of class, which is, of course, a good thing. There are care status differences, however, in both the nature of finances that the young people are using for their education and their involvement in various kinds of support programs. So again, we have a comparison here between the young people who are not in care at Wave 2 who are in college and the young people in care at Wave 2 who are in college. And again, I want to note the huge difference there. I mean, yes, 3/4 of young people are in care, so obviously the number in college can be larger because of that, but it's much larger. And I think the reason I want to note that is that because there's so few young people not in care who are actually in college, only 39, we don't have the statistical power, even though it's a fairly large study, to pick up some differences between the group in care and the group out of care that we might observe if we had a much larger number of young people we were studying. So what are differences we observe? We see it's much more likely that young people not in care are relying on money from relatives, friends, or other people than the young people who are in care. They're over 4 times, almost 5 times as likely to be relying on money from relatives, friends, or other people. whereas young people in care are more likely to have money from what we're calling another source. And that probably just has to do with small scholarships, other money at campus, from campuses, etc. Another big difference we see is involvement in campus support programs for foster youth. So the young people who are in care are much more likely than those who are not in care to take advantage of campus support programs for former foster youth. To my knowledge, those campus support programs are really there for former foster youth generally. So I don't think that's really driven by eligibility issues for those campus support programs. It's driven by either the awareness of these young people about the programs or their inclination to be involved in the campus support program. Young people in care are also more likely to be involved in study groups than young people who are not in care among those who are in college. So we also we asked the young people about, how much help did you get with college planning? So we're asking them to think back to, before they went to college, how much help did you get planning for college? And then we also asked them about their aspirations for college. We asked that also when they were 17, so you can look at the early report to see information on these kinds of things as well. You can see that about 1 in 10 of the young people are not interested in going to college, but 90% of them are, and about less than half, but over 2/5 of them, about 44%, said that they got enough or more than enough help planning for college. But you can also see that over 1/4 of the young people say they got no help or just a little help, planning for college. So there's a group that and another 1/5 that said they got not enough. So you got almost half of the young people who are saying, I didn't really get enough help planning for college. And that contrasts with the percentage of them who expect to go, basically want to go to college. So if you look at what percentage of them want to earn a 4-year degree or more than a 4-year degree, you can see that it's about 2/3 of these young people would like a 4-year degree or higher, and the overwhelming majority, 90%, would like to at least get a 2-year degree from college. That looks very similar to what their expectations are. We also asked the question, how far do you think you're going to go? Looks fairly similar. But again, we have some differences by care status in terms of the young people who are in care and those who are out of care in terms of the preparation that they got for college. And so if you look at this chart, it's basically showing, again, the response to that question I shared before, how much help did you get with college planning? And you can see that the young people who are not in care at Wave 2 are much more likely than those in care at Wave 2 to say that they didn't get enough help. Now, it's hard to know, did they not get enough help because they weren't in care and they weren't getting help? Did they not get enough help and that contributed to them deciding not to remain in care? Those are questions that we'll try to explore, but it is interesting that the folks who are in care generally believe that they got more help preparing for college than those who are not in care. We also asked a series of questions for young people who were not enrolled at the time we talked to them. So, almost, as I mentioned, a little over half are enrolled in school at the time we talked to them at 19, but that means almost half were not enrolled. And then we asked, why aren't you enrolled? And you can see that some of them are not enrolled because they say, well, I graduated from school and, I'm just not a place where I want to go to school right now. And you got some that lost interest, academic difficulties, but other reasons that loom large, and we've seen this in prior research, and they tend to get more important as time goes on, is you got 1/5 of these young people who became employed, and 1/10 they are caring for a child, couldn't afford going to school, not enough transportation. So they identify some barriers that are separate from the fact that they've graduated or they aren't interested anymore in going to school. And then the category of other reasons is really a long host of things that are fairly hard to categorize. But in total, of the young people not currently enrolled, 30% say that something was preventing them from continuing their education. So it isn't, they don't want to, et cetera. A significant percentage saying, something's keeping me from going back to school, and you see some of the things there that contribute to that. So in summary, about 3/4 of young people who are making this transition to adulthood from care in California. They were in care at 17 and we followed them to 19, are actually enrolled in school or are currently working. And we see some significant differences between young people who are in care and those who are out of care. So the young people who are in care are more likely to have earned a high school credential, they're more likely to have entered college, they're more likely to earn a vocational certificate, they're more likely to receive funding for school, and if they're in college, they're more likely to be involved in campus support programs and study groups. Now, important caveat here. We're working on this, but I don't want folks on the line to go away saying, well, the CalYouth study proves that being, extended foster care contributes to better educational outcomes. These are associations we find, and we need to do work, and we're in the midst of doing that work, to control for whether these differences have to do with the support that care provides, or the support that care connects young people to. In college, for example, you see this association between extended care and college support programs. But it also could be a function of the fact that young people who just don't want to go on in school are more likely to exit care, or that young people who have obstacles to going to school are more likely to be out of care, that those obstacles really don't have to do with the care experience per se. So stay tuned. We are working on that right now, and Nate Ockpitch, my co-author of this webinar, is taking the lead on that work, and we'll be sure to share that through the Chapin Hall website and the co-investment website. So back to Debbie Rauscher.
Thank you very much, Mark. So I'm going to talk just real briefly about some of the policy implications in California from all of the great research that Mark just presented. Before I do that, I actually want to, since we're on the subject of policy, share a couple of updates with folks on the phone. We're at the very tail end of our legislative season, the time when bills are either getting signed by the governor and made into law or vetoed. And I'm excited to be able to share that we've had a couple of bills that just got signed in the last couple of weeks that I think people will be interested in because they're directly related to the topic of education. So AB 2506 was signed, and this limits the use of Chafee grants at private vocational schools that have either very high loan default rates or very low graduation rates. So that will help to target those funds towards youth who are going to schools that are going to best serve them. SB 906 is one that we're particularly excited about. This extends priority registration for foster youth at all three public university and college systems. So priority registration was actually scheduled to sunset at the end of this year. So now it will remain in place, and it also actually expands the eligibility a little bit. So that youth who exited care after the age of 16 are now eligible, and it goes all the way up to youth who are age 26. So we're really excited about both of those. One other bill I'll just throw in there, AB 2656, also was signed by the governor yesterday, and this waives the fee for taking the GED for foster youth. So if you're working with youth who are needing to get a GED, they no longer will have to pay any cost associated with taking that test. In terms of policy implications from what Mark just talked about, there's a few things that jumped out for me that I wanted to highlight. One is that it's clear that support at all levels of post-secondary educational institutions is really essential for foster youth. 60% of the youth in the study were enrolled in college, and that was a mix of both two-year colleges and four-year universities. 90% of those youth, Mark shared, want a degree, and we know, unfortunately, from a lot of other research that we're not really even coming close to approaching that rate of degree attainment. So this really speaks to the need to make sure that these youth are really being supported in their educational goals. Determining responsibility for college planning and FAFSA completion. Mark shared that there was a good number of youth who reported that they felt like they got the help that they needed planning for college, but there was a pretty significant number who did not. We also know from other research that's been done that foster youth are not getting the financial aid necessarily that they are eligible for. And unfortunately, in our system today, we don't really have any designated person in the youth life who has the clear responsibility for making sure that all the planning activities and completing the FAFSA for financially getting done. And I think it's important for us to look about how we can make sure that there's some accountability and some more clarity about who's going to be providing that assistance. Better linkages to support programs is another one. Really figuring out how we can make sure that young people are getting connected to the support that they need. Again, looking at Mark's research, 29% of people surveyed didn't know whether or not the college that they were attending has a foster youth support program or not. And we want to get that number lower. We want everybody to understand the resources that are available to them so they can be accessing everything that they're potentially eligible for. And the last piece is looking at data sharing between college systems and child welfare to support future research. So there's great work recently at the K-12 level to do data sharing between the child welfare data system and the educational data system, so that those working in the K-12 systems can really understand who their foster youth are and track outcomes for that population. At the college level, we don't have that kind of data sharing in place at this stage, and so we're relying on a lot of self-report from foster youth in order to determine who they are. And so mechanisms that could be established to allow for more data sharing to really be able to look at some of these outcomes for the whole foster youth population over the long term, I think would be really beneficial. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And now we are going to shift over to the Q&A portion of the webinar. So thank you to those of you who have already sent questions in. And if there are those that have questions, feel free to go ahead and send them in now. So Mark, the first question that we have, at the beginning of the presentation, you referenced eligibility for youth to participate in the study. And somebody had a question, what were the specific requirements that made somebody eligible to participate?
Okay, so they needed to be in what we call child welfare supervised foster care, out-of-home care in California. So one of the limitations of our study, I should be clear, is that we don't have, in the juvenile probation system in California, their juveniles are in secure detention facilities or California Youth Authority, et cetera. If they're locked up, then in that case, they are not in federal foster care, because foster care, federal government standpoint, only involves non-secure facilities. But California, I think, is one of the states that is fairly expansive about providing foster care to young people who have been in the child welfare system. So we don't have them in our study, because at the time we launched the study, the feasibility of actually getting reliable samples of young people at the county level from the probation agencies just wasn't there in terms of our communications with the probation agencies statewide. So they're child welfare supervised. They were in care between 16 and 3/4 years old and 17 and 3/4 years old. So when I say on average they were 17, because it's true, on average they were 17. We talked to them, but the age range was 16 and 3/4 to 17 and 3/4. So in other words, they were at least a few months away from aging out, but as much as a year and 3 months away from aging out. And they had to have been in care for at least 6 months. We wanted to make sure, because there are a fair number of young people who come into care at the age of 17 who leave within just a few days or weeks. So these were young people who were all in care about 6 months. So that was the eligibility criteria. And then, as I said, if we'd tried to interview everyone in the state who fit that description I just gave you, it would be around 2,400 young people at that point in time. We didn't have the resources to do that, so we randomly sampled among the young people who met that description I just gave you, and oversample a bit in smaller counties so we can say something about county context.
Great, thank you very much. So the next question, actually, I'm going to go ahead and take. So somebody was asking what an ETV grant is. So this stands for Education and Training Voucher. In California, this is typically just called the Chafee grant. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the ETV terminology, you probably are familiar with what we call a Chafee grant, and that's what is It's the same thing as what Mark was referring to as a Chafee ETB grant. Mark, the next question is, for AB-12 youth in college who are availing themselves of tutoring, do you have any information about whether they're getting access to tutoring through a campus-based support program for foster youth like Guardian Scholars, or going directly themselves to tutoring?
Yeah, so we're just asking them, are you getting tutoring? So we didn't ask, what the source of that is. I think that's a good question. And it would be tough to ask it, even we're going to ask it, because some of these programs have different names. So we would literally have to be asking, are you getting it from a college support program, and then have a long list of names, because while there are Guardian Scholars programs, some of these programs are not called that at particular colleges. So all we know is that they are getting a campus-based tutoring program, but it could be from something like Guardian Scholars, or it could be from an EOP program, or it could be from some other support service that they have at the college they're attending.
Great. Someone wants to know, when you were using the term high school credentials, does that include a GED certificate and diploma, or is that limited to?
So I think on that slide we put them together, but in fact in our report we make a distinction. We ask whether you have a high school diploma, and then we ask a separate question around a GED or equivalent. So off the top of my head, the overwhelming majority of them who say they have one of those things, it's a high school diploma, but there are some that have a GED. And I just off the top of my head, and I can't go back, I can't look at my report while I'm looking at a screen here, I apologize. But in our report we do clearly distinguish based on what they're telling us, whether they have a GED or a high school diploma.
Great. We'll send out, when we post the recording of the webinar, we'll go ahead and also post a link to the full study. So for those of you who are interested in looking at the details of the study, that will be available. Next question is, do you have any sense for those youth who indicated that they received help with college planning, did you ask anything about who they received help from, whether it was a county social worker versus housing provider versus somebody else?
Yes, so we have some distinction, again, it's in the report, between help from family, help from professional. I don't know, again, that we asked, did you get it from I don't think we get, did you get it from a college support program, call it, a foster care oriented college support program. But we do distinguish and we have a set of questions that distinguish between help from family, help from professionals. And like I say, at this point, stay tuned, because we're already analyzing these data, trying to look at what are the predictors of young people finishing high school, persisting in college. And it turns out that there are differences in the impacts, if you like, or the relationships between who's providing that help and whether the help is in fact helpful in young people going to school.
Great. So we've had a couple of questions about the bills that I referenced towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
One asked me if I can read them again, because they weren't actually written on the slide. So the three bills that I mentioned were Assembly Bill 2506, that's the one related to Chafee grants. The second one is Senate Bill 906, that's the one related to priority registration. And the third bill I referenced is Assembly Bill 2656, and that's the one related to GED. And
Debbie, I think we're losing you. Yeah, I think Deb's having trouble with her phone. She did give me a warning that if that happened, to just stay tuned for a minute, and she has an alternative phone she'll be calling in on. While she's doing that, I do want to talk a little bit about research generally on extended care and college enrollment, because I think it's, comparing California to other states is sort of interesting. One of the things that makes me very optimistic that we're going to find out that extended care really does have some pretty powerful positive relationships with college going and persistence, is when I look at the percentage of young people in California who are not in care, who are in college, it looks very similar to what we found in our earlier study, in the Midwest study, when we followed young people in Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And in Iowa and Wisconsin, where young people had to leave care at 18, they weren't allowed to stay in care, you see rates of college going that look very similar to what you see in California for the young out of care. And then in Illinois, which is a state that extended care years ago, and thus we were able to compare Illinois to the other two states, the rates of college going look very similar to what you see in California among people who are allowed and are in fact staying in care till age 18. So I think that's very encouraging. Also, just the kinds of things we're seeing associated with remaining in care are very consistent with earlier research that shows that remaining in care increases the connection of young people to supports, like knowing about a Chafee grant or an ETV, like knowing about on-campus support programs for foster youth. If you stay in care, you have a social worker, and or you might be in a THP plus transitional housing program, or you might be living in a foster home supported by a foster family agency. And those intermediaries, if you like, are very likely to connect young people to supports they won't otherwise have. So I don't know if Debbie's back.
This is Debbie. I'm back. I'm so
okay. Great. Okay.
So to get back to the Q&A, somebody was asking about AB 2656 and who benefits from it. This is the bill that waives fees for GED. And AB 2656 actually defines foster youth very broadly. So anybody who essentially ever was in foster care, who ever had a petition filed under Section 300 or 602, which are the two statutes related to entering foster care, is eligible for that. So the next question is, well, there's a question, do you know where the youth out of care live? And maybe I know we did a whole web seminar on the housing piece, so maybe you just want to say a couple words about that and where people can find more information about that.
Sure. Yeah, so the young people who are out of care are more likely than the young people in care to be living with relatives. And in particular, they're more likely because you really can't live with your parents and remain in care. You're not supposed to. It's very, so we don't see that. We do see, and again, because I have to leave the screen up here and can't go look at my my online report, I can't remember the exact percentages off the top of my head, but I think it's maybe around 1 in 10 of the young people are living with their parents. You got another 20-30% living with family. It's lower than in the general population, but most of the young people who are out of care are living on their own. On their own with other young people generally. Some of them are off at school and dormitories. It's a relatively small percentage because there's not that many in college. And then we have very high rates of housing mobility among the young people who are out of care. So over a third of them had been homeless, and then another more than that reported have been couch surfed. So they're moving around a lot, and there are many of them, a significant percentage, are unstably housed.
Great, thank you. So the next question is about when you were talking about the different types of financial aid that foster youth are receiving. The question is, if a foster youth was receiving money through an independent living services program, ILSP or ILP, was that money included in the other category?
Yes, that's likely to be included in the other category, because the categories we were asking about were more, other than the ETV, the Chafee grant, the categories that we were asking about were the kinds of categories that you would ask any young person in college. In fact, the questions actually come from, we like to use questions from surveys that are used to the general population. So it's quite likely that that kind of source of funding would show up in the other category.
Great. So I have one other question for me about one of the bills. Somebody's asking if I can reiterate the information on the private college admission and funding. So basically, what AB 2506 does is right now in California, California defines for the purposes of Cal Grant what an eligible institution is to receive the grant. And if an institution has loan default rates that go below a certain threshold, or graduation rates that go below a certain threshold, like a loan default that are above a threshold or graduation that is below a threshold, those institutions aren't eligible for Cal Grant. And it's not exclusively limited to private institutions. Theoretically, it could be a public institution, but thus far it's only been private institutions that have not met that threshold to qualify for a Cal Grant. And what 2506 does is it aligns the Chafee Grant program with those same standards that are already in place for the Cal Grant. So if an institution isn't eligible for Cal Grant, then now they wouldn't be eligible for Chafee Grant either. So the next question is, does the type of placement have any correlation with staying or leaving foster care? For example, are children in group homes more likely to exit care than children in other types of placements?
So we are in the midst of finishing up a report on that very question. One of the issue briefs that one of the first issue briefs we're going to post from CalYouth based on this second wave of interviews with young people is, what are the predictors of young people remaining in care? Since I haven't shared those findings yet with our county and state partners and the other stakeholders in the project, I can't really share the results of that with you other than to say stay tuned, and in the next couple of months that we will answer that question for you.
Great. So the next question is, do you plan to conduct additional studies that follow up on participants to measure their success after successfully aging out of foster care?
That would be great. So I would say the following. We have funding from the partners that were listed earlier on. We have funding through the end of 2017. And some of the young people in our study, they won't really be beyond 21 at that point. So let me answer this in two ways. So right now, we're not funded to follow the young people who we're interviewing past 21, although I certainly will propose that, to our current funders and maybe seek other funding at that point, because I think it is very important to know how young people do after they're 21, after they are no longer able to remain in care. But we're funded to interview them through 21. However, there are things we can do to follow both those young people and then the much larger number of young people who have been in care in California over the last several years, both before and after the law, using various kinds of government administrative data. And we have an agreement with the California Department of Social Services to do just that, trying to look at things like wages. We can look at college enrollment and persistence through the National Student Clearinghouse. We can look at utilization of public aid programs like CalFresh and CalWorks. And we can conceivably also look at criminal justice system involvement using administrative records. And we have some funding from the William T. Grant Foundation to do that into late 2018. And so we will certainly do that because we have resources to do that. And we hope to get the resources to actually follow the young people that we've been following, because there's a lot of things you can't learn about through administrative data. So you really can't learn about, their social support. You can't learn about homelessness, really. I mean, there's a lot of things that, in terms of their health and well-being, that we just can't get reliably from government administrative records. You really need to track them down and find them. And the earlier study we did in the Midwest, I think, demonstrates pretty conclusively that if you want to do that, you in fact can follow 4/5 or more of these young people well into their 20s. So we hope to do that in California as well.
Great. So the last question I have here is very much related to what you were just talking about, which is whether rates of college degree attainment for study participants are going to be included in future studies.
Absolutely, absolutely. The only thing I would say about that is I hope it's different in California, but we followed young people to age 26 in the Midwest study and actually later than that, it's not released yet, but we're using administrative data to follow using the National Student Clearinghouse through age 30 with the Midwest study. And there wasn't a lot of degree completion. There was I forgot off the top of my head, but it's less than 1/5 of the young people in that study, even in Illinois, had a college degree by the age of 26. So, but we will do that. We certainly will look at college attainment, 2-year degree, 4-year degree. I think California has some things going for it that the other states that we've studied so far did not have going for them. One, it does have extended care, which only Illinois had in the earlier study. Secondly, Illinois really did not have and still doesn't have the kinds of college support programs in place that California's had throughout, well in advance of the CalYouth study and well in advance of AB 12 and the California Fostering Connections Act. So I think that's another thing California is going for it. And then thirdly, the post-secondary education plan in California. I know people concerned about budget cuts and everything, but I still think as an outside observer that the community college system in California, just has a lot of strengths that the community college systems in the other states that I've studied, particularly Illinois, which is the one that had extended care, just didn't have at the time we did our study. So our fingers are crossed that we'll see more degree completion in California than we saw in these other Midwestern states.
Great. Well, those, looks like we just got one more question. Let me take a look at this. So the question is, have you ever considered comparing California and Texas extended foster care outcomes, as they have the highest rates of children in care?
I'm open to comparing anybody out there who has the data and is interested, right? I mean, I have not had any conversations with folks in Texas about following young people out of care there, but at Chapin Hall we certainly would be open to doing that. The National Youth in Transition Database, I don't know how many people know about that. It definitely has its limitations, but a state that does a good job of implementing the National Youth in Transition Database requirements to track young people at 21 should know, at least to that age, which obviously isn't long enough to get degree completion, 4-year degree completion really, but we should be able to compare outcomes between California and Texas on a number of things using those data. But I do think in terms of college enrollments and education, the real gold mine and what every state in the country should be doing is going about linking its foster care records for these transition age youth to the National Student Clearinghouse data, because that's a resource that government has contributed to making available. It requires post-secondary education institutions to contribute data to the National Student Clearinghouse if they get federal financial aid, and that's true for almost all of the post-secondary education institutions in this country. And it's easy enough to do that. So, it'd be great if Texas and California and other states linked their foster care records to National Student Clearinghouse data. We're going to do that for California. We don't have current plans right now to do that in Texas.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that have come in. So I just want to say again to Mark, thank you so much for sharing all of this great information with everybody. It's been fascinating for me to listen to, and I'm sure for everybody else who's been listening in as well. And remember, for those of you on call, that we do have the next in this series coming up on November 17th. And with that, this ends this morning's webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks for all the great questions. Bye-bye.